All right. Good evening, everybody. This is Nate G. along with Dr. Lisle. Dr. Lisle, how are you doing today?
Good. How you doing?
Not too bad. It's the starting to wind down from the summer. We just watched the solar eclipse a couple of weeks ago. That was interesting. I tried not to look at the sun, but I think I snuck it in for about a second or maybe half a second.
Cool.
How about you? How's your summer going, Dr. Lisle?
Good. Everything's going just grand. I'm going to Las Vegas this weekend to speak at one of our good friends is Chef AJ, Chef Abby J, and she's holding a conference there, and Dr. Alan Goldhammer and I are going there and speaking, and we're going to have a grand time. As grand a time as you can have in Las Vegas with Alan Goldhammer. Yeah. So there you go.
That's funny.
So
Las Vegas
is salad and steamed vegetables, and we will not be going to any strip bars. And I'll be in my hotel room early, and we'll probably exercise. So that will be my Las Vegas trip, but it's going to be good.
Sounds like an exciting blast.
All right.
All right.
What's up?
Well, we got some questions today. We're going to continue on with some of the emails and questions. By the way, thank you guys so much for the listeners. We have gotten a whole bunch of great questions. So I put them on a list, and we just get through them as soon as we can. So keep coming in with the questions, and please don't be discouraged if you don't hear your question. We're going to get to them, as soon as we can. So. All right, so let's get started. This question is about homosexuality and lesbianism. So, dear Dr. Lisle, from what I understand from the podcast, people seem to end up with people of similar attractiveness, even though they probably would like to be with people who are more attractive. So how do you account for lesbian women? I see that homosexual men tend to go for the best and manliest man, but beautiful lesbian women, who I've heard are called lipstick lesbians, seem to go for the less attractive lesbians that are more butch-like and look like men. So why do we generally not see beautiful lesbians together? I think to myself, if lesbians want a partner that looks like a man, why don't they just get a man?
That's a very good question, and my thinking is this: I actually don't have any data on this, but this is what makes sense to me. I think that this is probably accurate. I think there's a pattern that I don't think that this is a mistaken observation. Obviously, there's going to be some significant percentage of exceptions, but I believe that this is probably true. And the reason is that there's going to be inside the heads of some lesbian women, they're going to have you're going to have differences in sort of your mating search images. So if you are a effeminate female, but you are a lesbian, you might be attracted to more masculine characteristics. Even though you're attracted to women, you are still attracted to women that might look like men. So I believe that this is the case. So I think that's why you're seeing this. And the notion of if they want a partner that looks like a man, why don't they just get a man? The issue is that they're not attracted to men per se. They're attracted to women, but they are also attracted to masculine characteristics. So this has to do with essentially the nature of mating search images that are undoubtedly coded in the brain and influenced by hormonal surges, and both genetically controlled as well as environmentally controlled in utero. So this is sort of, so you can think of to some degree of the brain being more masculinized or more feminized. And so a more feminized person is going to be typically more attracted to more masculinist characteristics, and vice versa. And so for example, a male looking at this looks at what is attractive in a lesbian female through the eyes of a heterosexual male, saying, "Hey, I like the really feminized one. What a shame that she's a lesbian." Whereas but if you were females, if you're a heterosexual female looking through the eyes of the problem, you would say, well, yeah, I can see why that she would be more attracted. The attractive or the feminized, pretty quote female would be attracted to a more masculinized version of a female. So I think that's all you're looking at, and I think that's sort of the end of the mystery there. So you could be a lesbian, but an effeminate lesbian who is attracted to a more masculine-looking creature that also happens to be a female. So I think that's what's going on.
Yeah, when I was in high school, before, when homosexuality was just beginning to be being talked about, I used to be the mischievous one in school. I used to tell my teachers that I was simply a lesbian trapped in a man's body. They didn't find it as funny as I did.
There you go. Of course. That sounds about right, Nate. All right.
Go ahead. Next question. So in a previous show, you talked about correlation of attractiveness and having to do with happiness. In your opinion, is there a correlation between self-esteem and happiness?
Certainly there is. Now, so let's define happiness for a minute. So what happiness is it's a diverse set of experiences that are possible for a human because a human has particular neural circuits. And these neural circuits are the overwhelming majority of neural circuits in your brain are rarely fired. So you rarely activate the neural circuits associated with eating an apple. You might do that, 50 or 60 times a year, but most days, most hours, you are not activating those circuits. So you've got all kinds of neural circuits in you, and they will occasionally be activated under specified conditions. So your nervous system is a lot like a piano that can play a tremendous diversity of music, but usually sits silent, or if someone is playing the piano, they're rarely playing, they're only playing one thing, they're not playing a whole bunch of different things. So your nervous system can't be both cheering for your team, winning the Super Bowl, watching that, plus working on a math problem, plus being excited about a new dress it's just wore, and also worried about a zit in an upcoming date. Okay, that is not all happening at the same time. So the nervous system has all kinds of circuits in it, and the experience of happiness comes as a result of the activation of happiness circuits. Now, happiness circuits are going to be activated under certain conditions and not activated under other conditions. So if you are nailing boards on your deck and you hit your finger, your thumb with the hammer, that is not going to activate a happiness circuit. In fact, you might have been activating happiness circuits as a result of progress that you're making on your deck, and your wife is saying, "Hey, that's really looking good out here, Biff." And then Biff hits his thumb, and now he's swearing and he's unhappy. Okay, so happiness circuits are activated under certain conditions, and they shut down under other conditions. Now, happiness is not entirely, but is largely related, or the vast majority of happiness experiences happen as a result of esteem dynamics. So it's esteem signaling, esteem processes that are taking place inside the brain. The most obvious is positive feedback from other people. The positive feedback comes in three competitive domains: mating, friendship, and in trade. So those are the three primary markets that human beings need to compete in order to survive and reproduce. There is a fourth esteem process that's important, and that esteem process is going to be the self-esteem mechanism. So the self-esteem mechanism is your internal audience that I've spoken about many times, that is watching your efforts and is judging the quality of your efforts with respect to your attempts to improve your ability to compete for esteem with the real live people. Now, there's another set of relationships in the world that are important, and that's the relationships that will take place within families. So there's a lot of vicarious survival and reproductive gains and losses that are going on, and human beings, can get excited when their kids do well and miserable when their kids are doing poorly, etc. So those are those are additional processes that can go on that are intense. Vicarious processes are very intense in family situations, and in pretty intense in friendship situations, and even can be fairly intense in when you trap or activate neural circuits in your team. You're the Cleveland Cavaliers and you're Cleveland and you haven't won a title, and now LeBron James wins a title for you. Now you're extremely happy about this. You have a vicarious process that's going on. So anyway, but the point is through all of this, we see esteem processes dominate the show. Now, it's not the only thing there is in life. You can also the esteem processes dominate the show for the simple reason that esteem processes dominate the variance of outcomes with respect to survival and reproduction of the genetic code. So what other people think of you is the most important determining feature of your genetic success, period. And so as a result, there are other things that are important, like how if you are hiking along by yourself or even with your friends and you find a benign environment where it's been hot and sticky and then you find an oasis, there's a lot of happiness involved there because you've just gone from a lousy environment to a good environment, and you can pick up the importance of the change of the environment in your survival, and your brain computes that and activates a mood of happiness to tell you that has happened. So happiness isn't exclusively associated with esteem dynamics, but it is dominated by esteem dynamics. One of the most important sources of esteem processes are self-esteem processes. So what your internal audience thinks of you is going to be a very important issue. So that self-esteem mechanism, the state of the self-esteem mechanism is highly correlated with a person's happiness during that time. So there is a very high correlation between self-esteem and happiness. It has not been well studied because other investigators have not separated out what I call self-esteem versus other esteem. They actually they have confounded the two, and they're not looking at them as two separate processes. But if you look at them as two separate processes, it is obvious that they are independent processes. They feel very similar, but they do come from different sources. And the state of what the organism thinks about itself is an enormously important predictor and controlling factor of the person's happiness experiences. Now, one of the most important things that I've ever
Mm-hmm. Oh, Dr. Lisle, I think we may have lost Dr. Lisle. Let's see if we can get him back online. Hello, Dr. Lisle. All right, just bear with us. Sorry about this. A little technical difficulty. All right, Dr. Lisle.
I'm back? Okay.
You are back. Okay, great.
Good,
Excellent.
Very good. Okay, so
Sorry about that.
yeah, I talked long enough on this question anyway that the technical gods decided to cut me off. So anyway, you have to finish that people have considerable control over their happiness. They're a lot of times not aware of this, and so it's useful to actually be aware that you have a lot of control over your happiness through the self-esteem mechanism, but it's not through the mechanism that most psychologists or counselors believe. You cannot use self-affirming statements to improve your self-esteem. That is not how the self-esteem mechanism works. The self-esteem mechanism works as an independent judge observing your efforts and then giving your esteem meter feedback on the quality of those efforts. And so what you have control over is you have indirect control over the self-esteem signaling that will take place inside of you, and that will have a major impact on your happiness. The self-esteem that you experience will be the amount of self-esteem that you earn. And so diligent effort, even in the face of struggles and difficulties that are maybe even embarrassing and frustrating, diligent effort will cause self-esteem to rise, and with that rise of self-esteem will be an increase of the moods of happiness. So that's the important. So self-esteem and happiness are not merely correlated; they are actually intensively causally related, with the happiness being the result of a self-esteem support that is caused by diligent action. So that's how that works.
And so, what's your take on self-esteem, or esteem from others that's earned kind of accidentally and over-rewarded? Yeah. So my example is maybe somebody who gets fame really quickly, like a video that goes viral or something, and and they have, it was kind of a fluke, and they just happen to be lucky. Are they less happy, or do they have to work less hard to get more esteem, or is this independent of other people's esteem?
Yeah, well, what's happening there?
Or am I just confusing a bunch of things? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what's happening is that the person is getting a whole wave of esteem signals from the outside. So this is exhilarating. Okay. So this is this looks like genetic gold that they just hit. Now, most of the time, what's going to happen is if it can't be repeated and the person's efforts are not particularly unique, et cetera, that it just happened to get popular because they said a swear word in a funny way to their dog, and now everybody's all laughing about it, and you've got a million hits. Okay, so it can be exciting because they get a bunch of positive feedback, but it's going to blow over very quickly. Okay, so the system basically gets all excited because there's a bunch of esteem, and then the esteem fades off. So now it's gone. No problem. It isn't like some terrible event happened. It was kind of a cool event, but it didn't really turn into much because it wasn't made out of much. So so that's how this is going to work. So we're always on. Our nervous system is always looking for the nature of the feedback from people outside as cues to tell us how to behave. So a person who has that happen is going to do another video that's similar to it and swear at their dog again in a different language, or however they do it with a different accent. And now they're going to hope it again, but this time they only have 30,000 hits instead of 1 million. So the fickle public has moved on to somebody else that's, I don't know, French kissing their dog. Okay, so now we get a whole new thing going on.
Don't give him any ideas, Dr. Lisle.
So this is how this goes. So really, your happiness is most dependent on a. So you could talk about your happiness at any 1 second. A person that is dying of cancer and a fair amount of pain can be in an acute moment of happiness when they see their long lost kid that they haven't seen in 16 years that comes to their bedside and says, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," blah blah. Okay, so there can be a tremendous mood of happiness there. What we talk about vaguely when people talk about happiness is what is sort of the average baseline of your life experience here over the last few months. That's sort of what people mean when they say, "Hey, are you happy?" i.e., what is the typical emotional tone of your existence? How often are you hitting moods of happiness versus how often are you hitting moods of misery? They're really talking about essentially an average score. And so that's what that word really means when we break it down into its details. And so waves of excitement that happen that are over-rewarded for some goofy reason, these things are going to cause little waves of happiness, but they will not be repeated, and they won't wind up being a major mathematical factor in that individual's overall life experience. So basically, your happiness is dependent upon the steadiness of the stream of positive feedback that comes in these three competitive environments as well as the environment within. So that's how that actually works. You think of your life as a scorecard with.
Oh, I'm sorry, Dr. Lisle. I was just recording a video.
Okay. All right. So enough of this question. Let's go ahead and move on. Let's see what else we got.
All right. We've got a caller.
Nate's way of saying I've said enough. Go ahead. What else?
Well, we've got a caller, but we've got a caller on hold. So, caller, I'm going to keep you on hold. We're going to go through a couple more questions, and then we'll put you on in just a little bit.
Okay.
Okay.
Good.
Dear Dr. Lisle. Thanks for such a great podcast. We love you. You're the best. I'm sorry. Okay. Dear Dr. Lisle, when pursuing a casual mating strategy, up to how many levels are men willing to sleep down? I've personally just re-entered the dating market after ending a several-year-long relationship, and I'm trying to calibrate myself. Also, I've realized that I'm a disagreeable person, and it really causes strains on my friendships, including with my best friend, who is just as or even more disagreeable than I am. But I'm also highly conscientious, so I often feel guilty when I've acted disagreeably with my friends. Do you have any tips on how to navigate friendships as a disagreeable person? For reference, I'm a 29-year-old woman with friends in a similar age range.
Well, that's a pair of interesting questions. Okay. First question about the casual mating and how many levels are men willing to sleep down. Apparently she's trying to calibrate herself. There's no hard and fast rule here. I was on an airplane once with a guy who was he was a nurse and he was working making a lot of money working in the oil fields of northern Russia up in Siberia. And he told me, I was explaining evolutionary psychology to him, and he got a big kick out of it. And he said, so we started talking about women and numbers and the math. So always it's the same conversation with me. It doesn't matter. It always winds up with mathematics. So he said, well, actually, where I work up there, there's one woman, and there's like 50 guys, and she's about a 2, but she's a 10. In other words, she's the only game in town, and so literally the handsomest, coolest guys are angling to get to her, and they do get to her, and that's who she's sleeping with. And that was interesting to me. I wouldn't have known that would be the case. So I didn't know that men were so flexible. But it doesn't, I guess, shock me. And I have learned over the years that certainly it's true that males are considerably more flexible than females as far as the range of how low they're willing to go. And so the answer to your question is there is no hard and fast rule. So you're not going to be able to calibrate because even if a person is a 3, there might be a 10 on a lonely night with nobody else in the bar that he's willing to go for it. So you can't find that if you are that 3 and there is a 10 and you've slept with 3 or 4 of those 10s, that doesn't mean that you're an 8. That just means you're a 3 that ran into some 10s. So yeah, you can calibrate pretty easily if we're honest with ourselves, and that is that you can tell essentially if you go out on a reasonable date, you can tell who texts who or writes back to who and how quickly and how bouncy they are and excited about the process. And it's going to be the person who feels over-rewarded that is going to feel the anxiety. And so you can calibrate yourself by who are the people that are excited, and then who are the people that seem to be consistently slow to respond and very cool. And that's how you can get that calibration done. All right. Now the next thing is going to be the disagreeable issue. Now this is an interesting issue about friendships and disagreeability and so forth, sort of in general. I would say that a decent maxim to use in friendship was passed on to me years ago. I read a book written by John Wooden, the great basketball coach at UCLA, and he had a saying, and that was go more than halfway. And that's a very nice, simple way to encapsulate the notion that human beings in general are a bit on the selfish side. And so in friendship, it is quite possible for two reasonable people to be thinking they're seeing something down the middle, but really they're both seeing it 55-45 their own way. So they feel slightly chiseled. And if you're a somewhat disagreeable person, you're a 60-40 trader, for example. So you believe that what is in fact a 50-50 deal is actually 40-60 against you. So you can be feeling irritated and sending irritating signals and irritated signals to the other side, attempting to guilt them into concessions. And you can be kind of a pain about this. And so a good general strategy in friendships is to consider that you use a little self-discipline and go more than halfway of what you think. Now, you don't have to go to 70-30, but you should be thinking, you know what, 60-40 is fine. I'll go 60-40 against. And if we do this, we may find out that we reduce, the cost is small, and yet you may find that your relationships, that it may reduce a fair amount of the friction in your relationships, particularly if you're somewhat disagreeable. So I had an incident that happened not totally dissimilar to this. It sounds a little fanciful to have a rule like this or actually pull this off, like this is some kind of Mother Teresa behavior that you couldn't really do, but you can do it. And this last week, I spoke at a seminar, and the seminar is about people losing weight and getting healthy and all this sort of jazz. So people pay a lot of money to come here and listen to a group of us, and we do a very good job. And in my presentations, I'm actually using evolutionary psychology as the lens by which to describe and explain some of the problems that people are having and why the problem in the modern environment is so difficult for people to get healthy and stay healthy on a healthy track. And of course, because I'm not using the word evolution, and I'm being very careful because we've got people of all kinds of religious faith in here, and I'm not looking to offend anybody, but I'm just trying to speak to their source code so that they can understand the actual dynamics that are sitting under their motivations, so that they can get more command of these things. And so I'm speaking about stories of our natural history, maybe some of my own stories. And anyway, a few of these stories are going to, in order to be entertaining and somewhat interesting, they're going to have romantic dynamics or sexual undertones. And so I have a few stories that I tell through the week, and they're heterosexual. And of course, as an evolutionary psychologist, that's kind of how we think. We think through reproduction dynamics. We now have thought, I think, intelligently and well about the origins of homosexuality, and it's very interesting. And believe me, I think most of us that are deep in this field feel very value-free and open, and I'm completely comfortable with the gay and lesbian community, et cetera. So I don't harbor, I don't think, a negative neuron about people that aren't of my sexual orientation. But at the end of this week, a somewhat disagreeable woman says, pulled me aside and said, can I give you some feedback? And I'm like, she's large, struggling with her weight. That's why she's there. And I'm like, yeah. And she said, well, your examples that you use are always heterosexual. And, there's other people in the world, and by using those examples, you are indicating that that's what's normal, and et cetera. So she's like lecturing me and giving me some negative feedback, basically calling me on the carpet. And I'm irritated because my mind is swirling through. Like I understand her point, but at the same time, I'm not there to carry a banner for anybody's social issues. I'm there to educate about a specific thing, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm not arguing with her, but I'm mentally defending myself, and it's irritating. It's irritating to get the negative feedback. So I was slightly frosty, but I was civil, and then I left, and I had a couple hours before the next presentation. And during that 2 hours, I actually had some time to think. My very first reaction was to text a friend of mine and say, let me just tell you what BS I just got. And essentially to get coalition support that I was fine, I was right, there's nothing wrong with my presentations, and she can go jam it. And I thought about it a little while longer, and I didn't do that. I just kind of thought about this. And the more I thought about it, I thought, well, I really am not there to have these people that come all from the country, that come from Iowa and God's country somewhere, and then to give them a Berkeley example in the middle of this. No, that's not what I'm here to do. I'm not here to fight your political battle. So I'm like defending my own position and my behavior in my own mind, and irritated still. And a little while longer, I was thinking, well, now wait a second. I understand where she's actually coming from, and she actually has a point. That example after example after example in this world of the way people are, she has to hear the heterosexual angle. And here she is paying a lot of money, facing this thing, and now she's going to get some more of it, which is, it's not unreasonable, it's just irritating. And so, and I'm thinking, I've got a good life. People tell me I'm really helpful. My life's just great. This woman's life's got some real struggles. I'm this naturally skinny person up there lecturing about weight loss, for God's sakes. And she's like many people that are struggling with this. And so she's frustrated. And I thought, Doug, you don't need to win this fight, and you don't need even to defend yourself. She actually has a point, and had I ever taken the time to figure out a way to put a slight signal into my lectures with finesse that indicated that I was fine with gay and lesbian relationships, if I'd spend the time to just find a sentence, not to be offensive and not to make a political statement, but just to do this, I could do it, but I just never have gone to the trouble. I thought that would be a good thing to do that. So I went back in there a couple hours later, and I tapped her on the shoulder, and I said, I want to thank you for bringing that up to me. Okay, I said that was really useful for me, and I'm going to make a point to do a better job. She was really pleased. And on my next presentation, I could see out of the corner of my eye how much happier she was. And I thought, and there I wasn't, the best thing was for me, because I wasn't in there frosty, winning the audience, but no, I was pounding my status as the leader of the group down her throat like I'm in charge and you're not, yet you're irritated with me, well, the hell with you, etc. Look, I'm fine. I didn't have that dynamic, but I would have had that dynamic had I not done that. But because I did that, she felt included. I felt relaxed because I didn't have a little subversive enemy out there. I didn't win that. I did something else. And as a result, it was an inclusive process. And then as the rest of the week transpired, it was very warm, way better than it would have been. So this is an example of going more than halfway. Like, I didn't have to go more than halfway. And many times in my life, people, I'm no saint. And a lot of times in my life, I've dug in my heels and not gone more than halfway. And I said, this is halfway, and too bad for you. and I can defend this to the teeth. And the older I get, I'm recognizing this as sort of a deep genetic algorithm that doesn't dare take any status hits in a Stone Age village under a game theory set of constraints that you don't want to give an inch. And interestingly enough, the sages of the world have recognized this problem and have known it's hard to coach humans out of it. We're very stingy about this. And yet, if we are willing to make that move and go more than halfway, it is very often a really, really good move. So that's a coda to this question that she's asking. That I think it's a useful example, and hopefully I will keep this example in my own mind in the years to come when I have similar situations come up and I feel that similar defensiveness about feeling like, no, I don't have to go that far. Sometimes it's the right thing and the best thing for you to go farther than you would have thought. Okay?
Wow, that's really interesting. That's cool. That's really, really interesting. When I was younger, me and my little sister, we went out picking berries, and we came back with a big bowl of berries. And of course, we got along really, really well. But when it came to splitting up the berries, we couldn't really agree on what was fair. So my dad, the brilliant parent that he was, what he said is, one of you splits it in half, and the other one decides.
Sure. Yeah.
And instantly, it was like everybody was completely fair about it. So.
Right down to the last berry, it all gets good.
Right down to the last berry, yeah.
You got it.
All
Very
right.
Good.
Well, let's take a little break from the questions. Let's take one of the callers, and then we'll get back to the questions. So,
sure.
All right, here we go. So, caller, what's your name and where are you calling from?
Hi, this is AJ from LA.
Oh my
Chef
goodness.
AJ.
How you guys doing? Love the show.
You're just grand.
Religiously. So
we are lucky to have you.
Well, thank you. I tell everybody about the show. I practically force them to listen if they want to be my friends. So here's the question I don't think you've covered. It's about what is embarrassment? What's the purpose of it? Are humans the only one that get embarrassed? And why is it that certain things would not embarrass somebody but mortify and humiliate another? To give an example from real life, I remember watching one of the talk shows where a young girl was videotaped unknowingly having sex, and the video was released, and then she actually killed herself from humiliation. And yet I've also met a female who is a porn actress who will have sex in a camera with total strangers. So how could the same thing mortify and humiliate one and not faze another? So I've always wondered, what is embarrassment? Is there a biological purpose? And because I personally don't like it.
Yeah, none of us like it. This is a great question, AJ.
Thank you.
Yeah, embarrassment is actually about. Well, as you can tell, there's going to be more than one flavor of embarrassment. There's a few. Sometimes embarrassing is actually you're being flattered. You're being actually somebody's giving you very high praise, and you feel embarrassed from the high praise. And highly conscientious people will feel uncomfortable that they're getting too much status, and that's an uncomfortable feeling, and they want to give it back. Okay, so because it puts them in a position that's actually uncomfortable and unstable. So, and it also puts them potentially at odds with other people that would be competitive for that status, and they may not want to be in that position. So that position is potentially a position of being threatened. So this is where humility, depends upon who a person is, but they can be embarrassed by high praise and then feel a humble reaction. Okay, so but no, the embarrassment that AJ's directly talking about is different, and that's the embarrassment that comes the painful embarrassment that comes from status loss. So that's what embarrassment is. Embarrassment is the emotion that a human being experiences when they are either experiencing status loss or they are predicting status loss. So you can be embarrassed. What's that?
Yeah, so that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense.
Yes. Yeah. So in the case of our porn star, the porn star actually gains status from her her attractive body and her sexual posturing, et cetera, et cetera. In other words, the girl who is embarrassed that she got videoed, her status in her village, her competitive process was not to flaunt her sexuality. It was actually to defend her sexuality as a pair bond partner. Okay.
Oh boy.
So therefore, to be exposed as someone who was quote promiscuous or whatever it was, on some wild things that she was doing or not, whatever, didn't make any difference. The point is that there was a status loss associated with now having thousands of people know that you did this sexual thing and it was taped, and maybe you wanted to be taped, and look at you and what you look like, and here's the things that you did, and all this kind of. The last thing that girl wanted was to have the village think that she was highly sexualized. And so as a result, the embarrassment was so painful that it was associated with her suicide. It certainly was probably a primal cause. So that's what embarrassment is. Embarrassment is a genetically designed device in our species, likely unique to our species.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Is there a way?
Yeah.
Could that young lady have gotten over it without killing herself? How do we get over embarrassment?
Yeah, she could have gotten over without embarrassment. She there was clearly some things in that nervous system there was a pretty that was an intense personality. There was a lot of emotional instability in there. Or else that wouldn't have been the reaction to that situation. Now, that doesn't. I'm not saying that she's an outlier. I'm just saying that wasn't somebody down the middle of the bell curve for emotional stability. It would have embarrassed and upset a lot of people and depressed them and got them angry, and they might have had to move to a new town and really have their friends circle around them, but they wouldn't have killed themselves. So clearly, we had additional factors that were involved here that were making this particular situation very dramatic. People can absolutely get over embarrassment. You're not designed, if you're badly embarrassed, you're designed to never forget it. It sits as a resonant program or a neural circuit sitting inside you, waiting for situations that are sufficiently similar to the one that happened to cause the embarrassment to activate and therefore warn you that you might lose status again because the same set of circumstances are coming up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
The human brain is brilliant at essentially recording. Now, this discussion brings up a very interesting point that people believe that all the terrible things that happen to them are essentially eating away at the quality of their emotional life experience. This is not true. Bad things that happen to you sit as resonant circuits, like embarrassing things or painful things or abusive things, etc. They sit as resonant circuits in the organism, and they are not active. They're quiet. Okay? And then if circumstances come up that are at least superficially similar, if the pattern of data, if the smell of a guy or the way he moves, are similar to somebody that abused you. Okay, I have had a friend that was raped by a man that looked very similar to Johnny Depp, and so she cannot watch Johnny Depp movies. Okay, so it just activates those circuits. So the circuits, but she's not walking around in any kind of misery because she was raped 20 years ago. She never thinks about it, and it doesn't interfere with her romantic relationships or anything else. But if she goes into a movie or Johnny Depp's in the movie and didn't know it, now it's a problem. Okay? So this is how memory works, and this is how embarrassment works. So embarrassment will sit, believe me, I've got things I'm embarrassed about, and they sit as little resonant programs. And if some little social cue or memory comes to remind me, I get to experience it all over again, usually at 30% of the intensity that it took place at the time, but it's a nice reminder to never pull a stunt like that again.
Well,
That's
very,
how that
very
works.
interesting. AJ, thank you very much for the call. We really appreciate it. We love your questions, and we'll look forward to talking to you next time.
Get some sleep. Don't waste your time listening to us. You got things to do. We'll see you pretty soon.
Bye.
Okay, bye. All right.
Yeah, it's interesting that this came up about the embarrassment. Earlier this week, for whatever reason, I was driving back from work to home through traffic, and it was like the 20 minutes where I just happened to think of every single embarrassing moment, like from the time I could remember up until the present moment. It was just like eating at me the whole time, and it was just I was trying to figure out why I was going to ask you later, but this is interesting. I like it.
Amazing. That activated a little circuit, and your brain did a review.
Right.
Yeah.
Who the hell
Something
knows,
happened
right?
recently. Yeah. Something happened recently that was sufficiently similar. It just sort of quietly activated the circuit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a bunch of our listeners are going to have that happen tonight, and they're not going to listen again for a while. All right, let's go on. What else? Maybe one more. Let's take one more.
Yeah, we got one more question, then we'll get the rest for later.
Yeah.
Let me pick one below the one, since we're kind of on the sexual psychology, kind of casual mating type of thing. I'm going to skip the other one that we had planned. But okay, dear Dr. Lisle, I've seen countless stories in the news over the past several years of attractive female high school teachers in their 20s and 30s sleeping with their male students. How does evolutionary psychology explain this behavior, as it seems counter to what you would expect from attractive females? These male students most likely don't have resources at that age, so is it likely that these runts are more physically attractive than their teachers, and that is the appeal for the females? Since the students are typically underage, their photos aren't published, so it's not really possible to compare the attractiveness of the students against the teachers. What say you?
This is one of the most ludicrous. If you just watch the politicians and the religious leaders and everybody else twist themselves into a pretzel over this problem, and the courts, like, this is where the society is a ways away from grasping the realities of evolutionary psychology. So young women, some 16-year-old girl and some 32-year-old teacher, he may be handsome and she may be cute and he's into her, but this is not fair, okay? It's not fair because she's got eggs there that she doesn't really know how well to defend. He's in some artificial position of authority, makes him look fancy. He's actually got a power relationship over her. This is a problem, and she's not human if she doesn't realize if she bats her eyelashes, she might not have to do so well on the test and she can get an A anyway, okay? So this is a problem. The reverse is not a problem, or I guess you could say it's a problem, but it's a total joke. Some young, handsome stud, okay, that is the cock of the walk of his high school, can appeal to some attractive female teacher, and at that point, this guy is a rising star. And he's very likely to be 10 or 20 percentile, have greater 10 or 20 percentile sex appeal than the teacher. And so, of course, the teacher is going to try to rob that DNA. This is a straight example of a female sleeping up under casual mating strategy. That's what it is. So, of course, he doesn't have any resources yet. So her Stone Age brain is not figuring on those resources. The Stone Age brain is just looking at superior DNA, and she's taken it. Now, the male does not need to defend his eggs the way females need to defend their eggs. So the male is extremely happy about this. And the idea that some male is going to be traumatized about this or they got taken advantage of is a total joke. And the notion that the teacher should be thrown in the pokey is a total joke. Okay, so now we should have rules and wrist slaps and so on and so forth because we don't want exploitation of power relationships, etc. I actually, when I was doing counseling at the University of Virginia, I actually came across an interesting case, which, believe me, I didn't have very much sympathy for. I forgot about this case. We're going back, folks. We're going back 35 years. So this kid came into the counseling center because he was really handsome. And it turned out he had a girlfriend, but it was a problem. She was always jealous, and then all these other girls were always hitting on him, and that was hard on him. And then it turned out that one of his teachers at the University of Virginia was hitting on him. okay, and was being really insistent about it. So this poor kid, was under a lot of stress. So I'm not saying that maybe there doesn't need to be some rules, but this is a completely different biological situation than the reverse, and the courts don't see it as different. So the female teachers are doing something that the young males find very exciting, and I actually knew a guy that this happened to, a guy named Bob, okay? And let me tell you something, Bob was a big, handsome guy. So this was no 17-year-old, wimpasson who was getting picked on and cornered by his teacher. He actually knocked her up. Okay, so bottom line is, you have no idea what a star this guy was. This guy was like a hero to us. So this is a completely different set of circumstances than happens on the other side. Now, I'm not saying that on the other side that there aren't females who aren't excited about this and that don't feel exploited, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm not saying it's all 180 degrees. I'm just saying that no, that what's happening here is absolutely predictable by evolutionary psychology. The males that we're talking about have grand sex appeal. I actually knew my English teacher in where I went to school in high school was a pretty good-looking, but not in very good shape, 40-year-old female, and she was not bad-looking. She was above average, but she was not fancy. And interestingly enough, her husband was also an English teacher and in a different school, and I met him, and he was a 10. He was extremely attractive. And that relationship broke up. But anyway, my teacher, I found out, my teacher was clearly frustrated at her lack of positive feedback in the sexual arena. I could tell. And so she would be mildly flirtatious and sexually suggestive, but, I'm like shrugging my shoulders like this was nothing I was interested in. Most of us weren't. But anyway, the long and short of it was that a few years later I found out that she got in serious trouble for having an affair with a student, and it didn't surprise me at all. So this was a 7 out of shape 40-year-old female that was desperate to grab higher than she deserved, and the only place to get it was out of the student pool, and that's exactly what happened. So there you go. That's that story, and I think that's about right.
All right. Excellent.
Yeah, my friend
we'll get to
Bob,
the next question. Yeah.
You see, I can't war hero. It's like,
Well,
okay.
This one's for you, Bob.
You got it. Bob
All
Z.
right.
We'll never tell his last name.
No, we can't.
Z. No, we won't. We won't. But he'd probably be happy about it.